The barriers that the men who eventually developed Auburn Hills found themselves impeded by weren't technically against the law at the time, she said. However, it was morally wrong, but everybody went along with it. In 1962, Samuel Triplett Johnson, Joseph W. Lee, J. E. Adams, and Dr. Julius Franks attempted to buy and develop a tract of land owned by the city of Grand Rapids. The idea was to create an attractive subdivision of 50 or 60 medium-priced homes on 20 acres just southeast of an intersection off Fuller Avenue and Knapp Street. The neighborhood entrance is Travis Street Northeast, and the area includes Drexel Dale and Palmer Courts Northeast. This wasn't part of the civil rights movement, Samuel Triplett told the press in 1995. We just wanted a place to live, a decent place to live, and we didn't want to be restricted. The men were acting in response to what was called redlining, a now illegal type of racially motivated credit rationing that made it difficult or impossible for people in certain neighborhoods to get a housing loan. Metz said in Grand Rapids, banks would only lend to blacks or insure mortgages on the southeast side, south of Wealthy Street. They couldn't move out. It didn't matter if they had money. And these four men had money, she said. So they just decided to make their own neighborhood.
This is the United States. Each dot here represents one person. You can see from space that we're a very segregated nation. If you zoom in on this map, you can see the cities, as I talked about. Whereas in the South, the African-American population, Black population is spread out. In the North, it's very concentrated in cities as a result of the Great Migration. And if you zoom in on Grand Rapids, very concentrated in certain neighborhoods. And these neighborhoods were always immigrant neighborhoods, but today they are racial neighborhoods, right? So for a long time, new waves of poor immigrants would live in these same neighborhoods. The Dutch in particular lived in these neighborhoods, and then they became racial neighborhoods maintained by racist policies. Some of that was explicit. So up until 1917, you could explicitly racially zone a city and say just Black people can't live here. Even past that being outlawed, Supreme Court case Buchanan-Wardley, you could have restrictive housing covenants where it would be written in the deed of the house that it could not be sold to a Black person. This is an example from Grand Rapids of language like that in a house deed. And then you get FDR, who signs the big housing policy that impacts redlining, which is the Federal Housing Administration, the FHA, and the Homeowners Loan Corporation, right? And they're pretty explicit about this, saying, you know, if neighborhoods are to retain their desirability, we cannot have racial mixing in our neighborhoods. So this is official US policy, right? This is taken from the underwriting manual of the Federal Housing Administration, and it's more or less sanctioning housing apartheid in the United States. And that worked. So they created vignettes about each Dutch descent. And they say this is a strong Dutch community with all that it implies of thrift. So you get some nice stereotypes, but it's a good area, right? Then you get this area, and you see some warning signs already here. So infiltration of, none, but relief families. That means people who are receiving government assistance, yes. It does say there are Black people in this neighborhood, yes, which is its own separate category on the form, which is a whole thing in itself. Yeah, and then this is the comment. And again, this was somebody from the government writing this report. concentrated on Sherman Bates, Thomas Union Eastern. This is a report about Baxter, right? Using straight up racist language gives it a D, right? So this neighborhood gets a D. One final one, you notice here there are no black people, no relief families, and the occupation of the inhabitants, it says native whites, right? And by native whites, they mean non-Dutch whites, or, they mean these are Anglo or German, Anglo-Saxon white people.
What was one of the takeaways had you ever heard of Auburn Hills and Grand Rapids before? Or what was a takeaway from something you did learn if you didn't know anything before that?
I can say I never really knew about Auburn Hills, but when I did hear about it, I was excited to hear that there was communities that are actively participating in getting rid of redlining and involving all sorts of people in their communities, not just, oh, this is a black community, this is a Hispanic community, this is a white community. It's good that they are diversifying our living spaces.
What I took away from the video is that Auburn Hills was one of the most diverse areas in Grand Rapids. Also, redlining was like the sectioning, like between different types of groups. I've never really heard of it before that, though.
We can't just have a whole 100%, just a regular 100%. We have to have at least a mix of different cultures and different backgrounds.
Can we ask Dalen right quick just that quick overview, how that hit him? And is there a similar situation in Saginaw?
Auburn Hills had to do with redlining, I believe. Basically, sectioning off different races, putting them into like this specific area. It hit me because at the end, of course, they said that it still happens today. It's just not as big as it was, or as to the point as it was now. It's everywhere, but it was more shown back then. There's not a similar situation here. I don't think there's but like she said, that it's everywhere. Racism is everywhere. And yeah, you can fight for it, but it's inevitable. Some people are still gonna think that people are different just because of their skin color. But there's always gonna be those people, so it's inevitable. But there's always still hope for something.
How do you get determination like that, and how do you become that fearless?
I said, how can we use these community leaders to give a message of inspiration and impact the future? That was my first question. And then my second question is, what can we do to grow awareness on places like Auburn Hills throughout the United States?
I live in Saginaw, Michigan, and I don't see any neighborhoods like Auburn Hills, Grand Rapids. Do you believe that redlining had to do with that? And do you believe that areas can still exist like that today?